All right, here we go. In May of 1950, the couple sailed from New York to France on the Queen Mary. With them was Jimmy Donahue, the 35-year-old heir to the Woolworth fortune and a cousin of the American socialite Barbara Hutton. The Windsors had got to know Jimmy and his mother Jessie in Palm Beach early during the war through a mutual friend. Wallis had been placed next to Jimmy at lunch, on April 18, 1941, and the friendship had developed over the next decade, helped by the fact that the Donahues always picked up the bill. Yeah, that's going to be a huge theme in why they keep hanging out with Jimmy, because Jimmy pays for things. I mean, he is generous, probably to a fault, the very opposite of the Duke. Now, let's get a little sketch of who Jimmy was. An odd bird, if ever there was one. Now, the book says that Jimmy had had an unhappy childhood. His father had committed suicide in 1931, probably over a homosexual affair. So because of his very unhappy childhood, he covered up his sadness with outrageous behavior and attention-seeking. A favorite party trick was to put his penis on a dinner plate and ask a waiter to carve it thinly.
He took it out.
He what?
He took it out.
Would you even stand to be around someone like that? Like, I can't understand why this guy was so charming. Everyone's like, oh, Jimmy's charming. Jimmy's so much fun. If a guy pulled it out on a dinner plate and told the waiter to carve it, I would flip a table and leave. That is so gross. Like, you know what's surprising to me is how there's not very much difference between the people of the lowest classes and the people of the highest classes in what they will sometimes do. It's us people in the middle who are trying to keep things together. But the people at the top and the people at the bottom, sometimes they're functioning on the same wavelength. Okay, so reputedly, his family kept a lawyer on 24-hour call to buy him out of the most dangerous scrapes, as stories circulated of orgies at his mother's Palm Beach estate, the castration of a lover, police investigations into callboys, and drug use. So as you can see, this is a real lovely fella to hang on your arm and get your husband jealous over. Apart from dancing in the chorus of a musical comedy, Hot and Bothered, Jimmy had never had a job, except perhaps as a court jester. And now he had his court, with both the Duke and Duchess captivated by his exuberance and skills as a raconteur. Jimmy intrigued Wallis with his unpredictable and flamboyant behavior and the fact that he was the opposite of her husband. Well, I mean, you know, of course he's the opposite. He's 20 years younger than your husband, and he isn't former royalty. I'm sure they don't align in very many ways at all. Where Jimmy was carefree and impulsive, the Duke was organized and precise. Where Jimmy was generous, the Duke was penny pinching. Where Jimmy was exciting and cheerful, the Duke was dull and depressed. Where the Duke reminded her of her age, Donahue made her feel young again. She'd had to entertain the Duke for the last 13 years, and now Jimmy entertained her. Tired of emotionally supporting her husband, she relished being swept up in Donahue's dynamic and spontaneous world. She gave herself willingly to the charms of Jimmy Donahue, says Grace, Countess of Dudley. It's easy to see why. He was very amusing. I mean, I don't know Jimmy, but a guy who pulls out his penis and puts it on a dinner plate and tells the waiter to carve it doesn't seem like the sort of person I would want to gallivant around town with, lest I, too, get swept up into whatever current police investigation is raining down on his head. But the book goes on to say that Wallis, who was in her mid-50s and taking stock of her life, felt that she needed someone to pull her out of her own personal depression. Her first husband had died in May, and the remarriage of Herman Roger had affected her deeply. She was bored, vulnerable, and flattered by Jimmy's attentions, intrigued by him, his youthful energy and talents. He was a qualified pilot, he could play the piano very well, and supposedly he could sing in half a dozen languages. And she was drawn to him because they shared the same sense of humor and fun. Can you imagine where Wallis is emotionally and mentally if this guy seems like a fit option to distract you from your hard little life? She has everything she could ever want. And yet she is deciding that she's just going to spite the Duke. She chose this. She should have just been like, I'm not marrying you if she didn't want to marry the Duke. And now that he's getting older and he's not, he's not young anymore. Now she wants to take up with 35-year-old Jimmy Donahue. A court jester is the only way to describe him. It's the perfect description. He seems like a fool. Okay, well, she was also attracted to him because he's very rich and generous and loved to spend money on her. Throughout that relationship, she amassed a substantial collection of furs one afternoon as an example of his generosity. He took her shopping. She picked out 13 dresses, and Jimmy footed the bill for $3,105. Now, of course, we might want to know what is that in today's money. Oh, just 35,000 pounds. As a publicly gay man, Donahue was also regarded as safe. The friendship now turned into an affair. How do you have an affair with a gay man? I mean, I guess he's choosing to be bisexual for you in this moment, but like, really? What? It's like, of all the people that she could, but then again, she is with the Duke. And as we're going to go on to see, he had tendencies of his own. So maybe this is her type. I don't know. For him, she was a game. And given his detached, cold mother, Jessie, she was a maternal figure. There was also a darker side for her. Jimmy also said that she resented the fact that the Duke had lost his throne, wrote Mona Eldridge, who knew the couple. Naively, she had believed his promise of making her queen. She despised his weakness in boring ways. With Jimmy, she found revenge and enjoyed humiliating her husband, in public if necessary. A few days after arriving in Paris, the menage a trois of the Windsors and Donahue went to a charity ball in a 17th century mansion, and there were 700 members of Parisian society. The Duke left at midnight. Two of the last guests to leave close to dawn were Jimmy and Wallis. On June 11th, Jimmy celebrated his 35th birthday, and Maxime's with the Windsors as the guests of honor. At the end of the month, the Duke and Duchess joined Jimmy and his mother, and the affair continued. The Duke played golf during the day and then retired early, leaving Wallis and Jimmy to spend both the days and evenings together. In November, Wallis returned alone to the United States, while the Duke stayed behind to finish his book, and the affair continued. The designer, Billy Baldwin, noticed that the two lovers began to frequent a restaurant that he often used off Park Avenue on 59th Street. He said after lunch they would just quietly go to Jimmy's apartment. The Duchess was always well behaved, but a couple of times I saw that she was rather tight because she liked to drink. They were inseparable in New York, and I know that during that time in her life she had more fun than she ever had before. Well, how is the Duke supposed to make do with this new arrangement in his life? You know, I mean, he was smitten with Wallis. We don't get it. We never will get it, but he was. So for him to be trying to write his memoirs, something he was already struggling to do, well, he knows his wife is off running New York City and having an explicit affair with this 35-year-old homosexual. I mean, could you concentrate on writing your story? I don't think so. Alone back in Paris, the Duke could not concentrate. For 2 weeks, he would ring Wallis both at bedtime and first thing in the morning, but whenever he called, the Duchess's maid was unable to say where she was. When he did reach her, his wife simply replied that she's been with friends, and she cut the conversation short. 3 weeks of her evasiveness brought him to the edge of a breakdown, like a legitimate breakdown, not just like somebody being like, I almost broke down, but like really people thought he was going to kill himself. After he had opened some press clippings from a news agency addressed to the Duchess, it became clear what was happening. The Duke abandoned the book and decided to go to New York. Murphy, remember, poor Murphy, he's the guy from Time Life who's been tasked with getting this book out of the Duke, and he has been beside himself this whole time because it has been an arduous journey, if ever there was one. He's not about to let the Duke run off to America and solve this marital discord. We got a book to write, so he follows the Duke. He wanted him to keep working on the book. So concerned was the ghostwriter about the Duke's mental health that he would not allow him on the deck alone at night for fear of his committing suicide. It was the greatest test of the Windsors' 13-year-old marriage. When the Duke finally arrives, the Duchess meets him. She's got her little Cairn Terriers with her. They're just laughing like, oh, isn't it crazy that people want to say that there's something wrong with our relationship? Nothing's wrong. Crazy people. But you can laugh heartily at the published reports that you're estranged and make these public displays of affection, but she continued to see Jimmy all day and all night. I mean, all they did was just, shop and go eat lunch and go have brunch and more shopping. It's like, I can't even begin to understand how this could be entertaining day after day after day after day after day. At Christmas, the three of them attended Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral, the first time since the reign of Charles I that a British monarch or ex-monarch had taken the sacrament from a disciple of Rome. 2 days later, the Windsors gave a luncheon for Cardinal Spellman, a homosexual friend of Jimmy's with a penchant for cross-dressing. A cardinal? Really? Interesting. All part of Jimmy's mischievous attempt to persuade Wallis to convert to Roman Catholicism. Wow, okay. I don't have comment there. Almost nightly, the Windsors and Jimmy would find themselves at the El Morocco nightclub, but the Duke would leave alone at midnight. And then, and this is crazy, Jimmy came into his own, wisecracking, cavorting, camping, telling naughty stories, and gossiping about the other patrons. Next morning, the haggard Duke would make his way to the Duchess's room to assure himself of her safe return, only to be brought up short by a scrawled warning taped to her door. Keep out, stay out. Or sometimes, don't come in here. Everything about his life has failed. Everything about his life has failed. He threw everything away for this woman, who would then throw him away so she could have an affair with a 35-year-old gay man because he buys her pretty things and takes her to lunch. Can you even begin to imagine how he didn't throw himself off the deck? You wonder. Like, at a certain point, I'd just be like, I'm done. I can't. You know, I mean, like, what is he living for? What hope does he have? On Valentine's Day, the Windsors were guests of Jessie Donahue, that's Jimmy's mother, at the Venetian ball. The gossip was that she had bought the Windsors in the way that she'd seduced the writer and socialite Elsa Maxwell and columnist Maury Paul with substantial cash presents as Christmas and birthdays. Rumors began to circulate that the Duke and Duchess's marriage was on the rocks. The novelist Rebecca West, who had been mooted as a possible ghostwriter for the Duchess's memoirs, wrote to Ewart Robinson, the right-hand man to Lord Beaverbrook at the Daily Express. I've been thinking very seriously over your letter, and I have come to the conclusion that if what you predict comes to pass and the Duke and Duchess of Windsor part, I would not care to have anything to do with her memoirs. Right, so that's the gossip. They're not going to make it. And how could anybody think they were making it? She's running around town very evidently with another man. But meanwhile, even though she wants to act like she's, 30-something and can just stay out all night and party till the break of dawn, meanwhile, she's dealing with things that mark her age. She has cancer, again. In February of 1951, Wallis entered the Harkness Pavilion in New York, registered as Mary Walters, where she was successfully treated for cancer of the womb, which required a hysterectomy. She was in the hospital for 3 weeks, during which the Duke pottered aimlessly around the Waldorf Towers, refusing to see people, and showering her with roses and beluga caviar, which she complained was too salty. Why would you even complain? I mean, the poor guy is trying to do his best. This is the first time I've pitied the Duke. I really, really, really have compassion for him in this chapter because I know he's the worst on a number of different levels. He's shallow, he's self-centered, he's a penny pincher, all these things that you're just like, oh, yuck, like the worst of humanity. But he's a wounded soul. Like, he became this way for a reason. I don't know anything about his childhood. That would really be something to look into. I've heard often enough that he was deeply and horribly abused by his nanny, and his parents clearly didn't have the time of day for him. And, he grew up to, eventually abdicate, and then his whole family turns against him. And so he's grasping for this one person who he has decided, he has made this narrative that it's this beautiful love story. And he is very childish in his understanding of love. It's very much like this very passionate but puppy love almost feeling towards her. Like, he just can't even begin to see her for who she truly is. All he sees her as the fantasy he's created. So can you imagine that you've pinned everything on her, which is of course why she resented him, because it's too heavy a weight to bear. But he had, and now to have her running around with somebody who is so inexplicably wrong for her. It's not even like, it would be one thing if he could understand why she was attracted to him, but he's 35 years old. He's just a little party animal. He's quite literally a court jester. He's, and he's gay on top of all of that. Like, it would just be so clear that she was choosing him just to say, he's everything you aren't and I hate you. I hardly understand how he got out of bed in the mornings. Okay, so there he is trying to earn her love as she recovers from her hysterectomy. Well, as soon as she finished that up, she recovered real quick, because there she is getting cut up in February, but by May, she's already jumped back up on the Queen Mary to go find out what Jimmy's doing, because he's with him too. And the book says that their relationship continued. She's literally just got back from having hysterectomy, but she can't find Jimmy fast enough. She said, The book says that the affair was as hot and heavy as ever, especially when the Duke paid a week's visit to London, where he desperately went around the antiques fair trying to find gold snuff boxes to go with the collection that Jimmy had given to Wallis. I mean, he's pathetic. He's pathetic. And that's the word that is so often used to describe him by everybody. He's pathetic. And it is pathetic. Your wife is having an affair with this 35-year-old gay man. He gives her these snuff boxes. And you are then, well, she's off having the affair. You're running around London being like, I wonder if I can find some more of those pretty little gold snuff boxes. So, because I think she really liked them. Jimmy gave her some. And I think I could maybe get in with her if I could find some more to go with the collection. It's just like, oh, please stop, stand up for yourself. If he were to throw it all into her face and be like, get out of here with this, you and Jimmy, out. I actually think she would have found that extremely attractive. But she hates him because he's pathetic. But he's pathetic because he loves her. It's just this horrible, horrible, horrible circle. Diana Cooper continued to provide a useful commentary on the Windsors' behavior from a succession of dinner parties. Oh, she's always good for a word. She said that during this time, Wallis no longer referred to David as the Duke, which she used to insist that everyone do and show him that honor. Now, she said that Wallis referred to the Duke as my romance, with a funny tone. Not sneery, but not straight. So they all go out to this nightclub one night. They're joined by Jimmy, who, rushes up into the place shouting, singing, and yelling, hit it up, hit it up. And then he goes over to the piano and he's playing Rachmaninoff. And then they're in the car on the way back. And Jimmy turned to Diana and said, I adore Wallis. She knows she's only got to call on Jimmy and I'll do anything for her. I love her. Like my mother, Not any other way because I'm not that sort. But after this conversation, Diana Cooper relates that for the first time she felt sorry for the Duke. She says, isn't it all desperately sad? He showed nothing, I have to admit, on his royal weazened face. But if it's true, and he learns it, the wife is gone, the legend dead, he'll have to throw himself off the Empire State Building. Yeah, poor David. I mean, really and truly, to sit there in the car and listen to this guy go on and on about your wife, and you know full well stuff is going on. He can't bear to look it straight in the face. He wouldn't dare in his mind go there. Of course, he lives with the anxiety because his body knows it, even if his mind doesn't know it. So he's over there just driving himself into the grave with worry about it, even if he won't articulate it to himself. But he's got to know. And even if he never let himself go there in his mind with what they were actually doing, he knows how it makes him feel when the Duchess is so cold towards him. In July, Jessie chartered a boat with the Windsors as her guests. The yacht was not sufficiently large to carry all of Wallis's wardrobe, so her maid, Ophelia, and the Duke's valet followed the yacht along the coast in the Windsors' black Cadillac with a van, carrying the luggage. That's your hint right there, you got too much. If you're staying on a yacht with a bunch of other people, and yet you can't find enough space in order for you to have all of the outfits and clothes and all the trinkets and junk you want to bring along. Each evening, Ophelia would bring on board the outfit for the evening and the next day. The grandiosity is just ridiculous. I mean, I'm up to here with it. The affair was now blatantly obvious. So it's no longer like, could it be? Is it happening? I don't know. I saw them one time. Maybe. Everyone knows it now. The obviousness of the affair and the fact that everyone now knew it excited Jimmy and Wallis. The fact that they were humiliating the Duke was kind of what got them off. I mean, you guys, the things that they would do are so gross. Like, this is disgusting behavior. This would be disgusting behavior if these were like 20-somethings. This is a 55-year-old woman and a 35-year-old man. And they are at a fancy luncheon. And this is what they decide to do. It says here, lunching with Lady Kenmare in her villa. Wallis made an excuse that she wanted to show Donahue the view from the first floor guest room. They disappeared upstairs. Meanwhile, the Duke remained at the lunch table reminiscing about his time as monarch. The embarrassed guests knowing the Duchess was having it off with Jimmy in one of the upstairs guest rooms. Gross! That is so gross. That behavior is disgusting. And I'm not even talking about the fact that she's upstairs having sex in somebody else's house, but I'm talking about the fact that everybody at the table knows that's what she's doing. And that her husband knows that's what she's doing. And then he's sitting there reminiscing about when he was a monarch. Well, his wife is upstairs doing it with a gay guy. Like, what is this that his life has become? All right, well, in Porfino, which they used to visit each year, the royal couple were guests of the actors Rex Harrison and Lily Palmer, who had a house there. The Windsors had first met this couple in New York, and the Duke had really taken a shine to Palmer because she spoke German like he did. So the Duke, in the middle of boisterous parties, would seek her out so that he could, in a quiet corner, recite German poetry with her. So an interesting friendship there. And Palmer remembered that although it was 20 years since he had abdicated, he liked to see protocol observed. Only you had to guess when to observe it and when to ignore it. Naturally, you had to be punctual to the minute and stand up whenever he stood up. Even if he was only going to the toilet, respectful attention was drawn to a function that common people preferred to attend to as inconspicuously as possible. And when you greeted him, a little bob or rudimentary courtesy was appreciated. I only bobbed to him. His Duchess got a firm handshake. She said that entertaining him was sometimes awkward and odd. His sense of humor on the subject was disturbing. You know, he once said to me with a smile, I've got a low IQ. Oh, but sir, I protested loyally, just think of your book, A King's Story. That's a fascinating tale, and very well written. Oh, I didn't write it myself, he said. Anyway, that's all I know. I mean, it would just be like, how do you have a conversation with somebody like that? It's odd, and it's awkward, and it's like, oh, okay. Well, good book anyway, though. I mean, it's like, how does the conversation keep going? And by the way, it's very interesting that he would confess to her that he did not write it, because later on when we talk about that memoir, the press tour that he did was based largely on the fact that I wrote it myself, every word. I worked like a dog on that thing. You know, and he goes on to tell about like this arduous schedule he had to keep up. Anyway, he confessed to her he didn't write a word of it. The Duke and Palmer always talked in German, and he confessed to her that he had never felt at home in England. When I first set foot on American soil as a very young man, it came to me like a flash. This is what I like. Here I'd like to stay. And when I married an American, I hoped we would live in America. But as fate would have it, my wife hates America and only wants to live in France. And that's the way it goes. Oh, poor thing. I mean, it's just like every turn of the way, his life is just a massive disappointment. Now, these two are just old and gross and weird. I mean, the book continues to just describe in detail just the weird ways that they are. Just one night during the Windsors' visit, Greta Garbo and her longtime companion, George Sheely, were in Portofino, and the Harrisons invited them to meet with the Windsors. So they're all sitting around and they're talking about, in the event that a film was ever made about the Windsors, who should play them. And the Duchess is like, Katharine Hepburn. Like right off, she knew who was going to play her. But then everyone was silent about who was going to play the Duke. Wallis certainly didn't have an answer. And then Windsor nodded politely in Rex's direction and said, I think perhaps you would be the best choice. And it's like, well, but why? They don't even look alike. You know, it's just like, was he just trying to be nice? It's like, just nobody knew how to talk around these two because they didn't ever say anything that made any sense. Okay, well, upon saying that, Rex decided to show the Duke how very little he liked him. Rex, in their open U.S. Army Jeep, drove the Windsors from their villa, perched high above the town, down the perilously steep goat track to the harbor, the Duke clutching the windshield. Don't you ever have the seats recovered? Said Wallis reproachfully, settling gingerly in her white dress on the lumpy back seat as if you're about to sit on a raw egg. Returning, Rex, who didn't like the Duke, muttered gleefully, Nearly lost a little bugger on that curve. The next day, the Harrisons, with Greta and Sheely, joined the Windsors on their yacht, moored in the harbor, to find Wallis furious because Jimmy had not yet returned from the port. At that moment, Jimmy appeared in the doorway, hellowing exuberantly in all directions, his arms full of gardenias, which he deposited grandly on the Duchess's lap by way of a peace offering. She swept them to the floor and stood up and said, Do you know what time it is? So clearly she's jealous because she thinks he's been having his heyday over there in the port. And she's probably right. Now, this was all very awkward for everybody else, to see her so swept up in anger and indignation that her lover boy was not there when she arrived. But the evening got progressively worse, and so awkward and strange. What has happened with the Duke and the Duchess and their lifestyle? So the only other guest who was on the yacht was this former American senator and his wife. And this guy, I don't know if he was drunk, I don't know if he was just crazy. I think he was both. He was carrying on about his pet aversion, the British who over and over again had sacrificed innocent American boys to save their empire. And as an isolationist, I guess they thought that he was within his rights to say that, but that's bad manners at this party that, you know, the former king of the empire is sitting right there. It's very awkward. And Jimmy tried to change the subject without success. But then he does something that is just so bogus and stupid. I'm not surprised Wallis was annoyed with it. Now, in order to divert attention, he rose from the table and, still dressed in his midnight blue velvet dinner jacket, leather pumps, and diamond cufflinks, casually jumped into the sea. The Duke was stunned.
Oh, but there must be protocol.
The crowd in the harbor howled with delight at the sight of Jimmy swimming in the harbor, which was full of refuse, dead rats, and condoms.
Oh, that's disgusting. Oh, I can't handle it. Oh,
That is so foul. Wallis's jaws were clenched and her nose white with shock and anger. That boy has no manners, she finally managed to say. And I'd like to ask you all not to speak to him when he comes back. We'll just act as if nothing has happened. Jimmy now returned in a green velvet dinner jacket to discover the senator still droning on. Well, I've tried again. And once more he leapt into the water. It was the end of the dinner party. The guests left silently, while the hosts engaged in a passionate conversation in the library. What a way for the night to end. Jimmy over there, drenched with condoms and dead rats. Everybody else just sort of like silently leaving this very awkward and awful evening. The Duchess being just so uncomfortably jealous about everything to do with Jimmy. It's just so gross. Well, the Windsors now moved on in their many, many vacation spots, and Doreen Spooner was sent to photograph the Duke, but she was not impressed by the couple. She said it was so hard to see why a king had abdicated his throne for that woman. I didn't take to her at all. The shots were taken out in the garden by the villa. As with so many photographs taken of them, the couple seemed to have an agenda of showing how blissfully happy they were, and that the crisis that rocked the monarchy had all been worth it. The ex-king, Edward VIII, though quite formal in manner, was pleasant and willing to please, but ex-Mrs. Simpson wasn't. She was brittle, angular, devoid of all warmth. She smiled for the camera, but like a robot. There was no feeling behind it. Yeah, everything to do with these people is such a show. And I think that's the thing that would be so tiresome about them, is that nothing that they are doing is honest. You know, they can't even have an honest marriage. She's running around, like even the fact that she's running around with somebody who isn't even heterosexual. He's a homosexual. Like everything that they do is just off kilter and strange. By September, the Windsors were back in Paris and under surveillance by the French Secret Service. When the Duke left for London at the end of the month to see George VI, who'd been operated on to have his left lung removed, the relationship with Donahue continued. So anytime he's out of town, she's getting Jimmy to come over. Even when he is in town, she's not being very discreet about it. But why would she be? That's the whole point. She's trying to hurt his feelings. The Secret Service are watching the Duchess. And in one report, they said James Donahue, said to have had an affair with her for 4 years, rolls up in the evening and takes her to the Paprika restaurant and then to a nightclub where there's a cabaret. Donahue returns to the Duchess's home with her at 2:20 a.m. and then he is seen leaving at 5 a.m. So, of course, as one does wonder, and one's mind does wander, what kind of affair could these people possibly be having? What are they doing in these closed rooms? Well, the book tells us. It's explicit, just letting you know. The nature of the physical relationship between Wallis and Jimmy intrigued people. According to Billy Baldwin, Jimmy once, when drunk, had tried to circumcise himself with a penknife, which made intercourse painful, and therefore they relied on sex. According to one biographer, Donahue had claimed Wallis as the best at that certain activity. I will not use the words he describes because I would rather not sully my own mouth with it. Some said they had oral sex, but I can't believe Jimmy was into all that, thought Nikki Haslam. He enjoyed her company. There was no way that Jimmy would have done that with a woman. He was just so gay. But then another historian, an art historian, said, oh, they did have sex. And he says he asked about it. He said, I asked Jimmy Donahue when he was drunk and ready to say anything. So what was it like going to bed with the Duchess of Windsor, says Richardson. And he said, it was like going to bed with a very old sailor. Horrifying. Can you imagine if that's what somebody said about you? Ooh. Okay, so it's all just horrific now. I mean, it's gross. It's gross, isn't it gross? Like, you guys, isn't it gross? That's all I can keep thinking about, is that this is not a life to live. God forbid it if any of us get to the age of 55 and this is all we have to show for ourselves. Now, the American journalist Cy Sulzberger often met the Windsors during the 1950s. And he said of the Duke, he's curious and he's somewhat a pathetic fellow. There's that word again. He wrote in his diary that although he has, of course, given up any rights to the throne, he still maintains a strict atmosphere of court etiquette. There is much curtsying and bowing despite the fact that he's extremely informal and friendly. The Duke had just returned from a trip to London, and Sulzberger was touched by his obvious affection for Wallis. He said, after dinner we were sitting together talking, and every now and then, when he would look across the room at the Duchess, he would say,
Wasn't she wonderful? It's just wonderful to see her. You know, I've been away for a week. Isn't she charming?
and you wonder, is he saying that because he's trying to convince himself of it, or does he really find her to be charming? Sulzberger, though, goes on to paint yet one more portrait of David just being odd. He's an eccentric weirdo. After dinner, there was a pianist. The Duke was transported with joy. He played a few songs rather badly and joyfully imitated the playing of various instruments, such as the cello and the violin, waving his arms around like a happy schoolboy. The Duke drank a bit and seemed just slightly tight at the end of the evening. He talked steadily during dinner. At one point, the Duchess leaned over the table and said, "You promised you were going to listen tonight because there's a lot of brains around, but you are talking all the time." How condescending. And he had replied, "Oh, I have to talk, otherwise I'll fall asleep." I mean, the two of those people, like, it would just be weird. Like, anybody who spent any time around them would know that it was all a facade, that they had both made the greatest mistake of their lives by hitching themselves to each other. What a hateful thing to say at the dinner table to your husband. "You promised you'd be quiet tonight. There's a lot of brains around here, and I don't know why you're still talking." Like, gosh, lady, chilling on the hate. Now, a few weeks later, Sulzberger attended a 10-course dinner given by a UN delegation, and including the French Prime Minister René Pelvin, for what he describes as, quote, "a weird collection of social derelicts." That is going to be my favorite phrase yet in this chapter, maybe in the book. The dinner itself was very lavish, it was very extreme. It was 10 courses, like I said, and on the 7th course, a complete string orchestra popped in and started playing away in a fashion reminiscent of pre-war Vienna. From then on, the Duke couldn't eat because he was too busy waving his arms around in time to the music, which was a favorite habit of his. Whenever I've seen him anywhere near music, out comes his conductor's complex. I'm still dying over that weird collection of social derelicts. That's awesome.